Hi gang, Rob here. It's the evening of 23 March 2015 and you have arrived at installment 5.0 of TKP 2015. That is Traditional Knife Pilgrimage, my trip to Titusville, Pennsylvania. This is also part 3 of a subset filmed at Great Eastern Cutlery, GEC. And this video is going to be continued to be hosted by William Howard, son of company owner Bill Howard, and it's going to cover the grinding of a GEC blade through assembly of a Great Eastern Cutlery knife. So I will get out of the way and let you watch and listen to William and the gang at GEC, and I'll be back at the end of the video to tell you what's next. Enjoy!
So the blades come over to here, and the first thing we're going to do is grind our backs. So you can see on this particular blade I've been carrying around, we still have a point protector back here. If this blade had a long pull in it, we would have a bubbled up back basically. So we use this grinder on our left corner there. We load some blades in like this, and we use that to regrind. It's loaded in, it comes along and grinds the back. Regrind that back to the line that we want it to be. So in this case, we're just following the back and removing this. But in case of a long pull, we'd have to get it back to the way it was before that long pull was in there. Then from there, they're sent over to just behind Jameson there. You can see the machine with a blue box in front of it. That's called a double header. And then there are 2 wheels that spin really close together. And we use a gauge to place blades in between those wheels at certain points. And a foot pedal in there that brings the wheels in and out. We use this for several different operations. In this case, what we're doing is we're removing this black from the tang, so this heat treat scale material. If you're familiar with our satin finishes,
yes,
the double header is what does the satin finish. Okay, so we apply a compound or a grease to it sometimes, and it will clean up a part. In this case, we're trying to clean up the tang, so we want the tang to look nice and shiny like that, and that's where we would do that.
So does the double header apply the main bevel angle to the blade as well, or is that done before it gets there?
We can use it to make our edge slightly thinner.
Okay, but the main bevel is grounded.
Yes.
Down back in this area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're basically applying a finish with the double header.
Yeah. And what we're looking for is that this area here is the finished surface. There's not going to be any grinding done to it or anything. So, with carbon steel, we want to make sure there's no pits that have gotten in there somehow. Sometimes there's scratches in the steel when it gets shipped to us, and if there's scratches through there, we need to fix that before the knife gets assembled. So after that, the blades then come over here to our grinder, so we're ready to actually grind the edge onto the blades. Okay, so these 2 grinders down below us here are our primary grinders for putting the edge onto the blade. You can see they're pretty old, much like the majority of our equipment.
They must work well then.
Sometimes, yeah.
Do your operators do their own machine maintenance, or do you have maintenance mechanics?
Well, everyone is responsible for maintaining their equipment in the most basic ways, In the case of the grinders, a lot of grease. So you've got a lot of water running on metal, and a lot of sliding, moving parts, so constantly greasing them. But we do have a machinist here that does a lot of work on our dies. He also helps, when a lot of these are so old that when a part is broken or damaged, we can't just buy a new part. We often have to make a new one here in-house. So what we're doing here is, as I said, we're grinding the actual blade grind, okay? So the way it works is you have a grinding wheel which is under the hood there, and off to the side you see a hydraulic on top there. One thing I didn't mention, these are called Nicholas taper grinders, okay? So that hydraulic is attached to a series of tables. Each table is attached to another table, and those tables can move in unique directions. So one table can twist like this, another table can move like this, which is our taper. There's also a series of rollers underneath that can push the blade in and out at certain points. And all of that is done in a particular manner to grind the blade that we're grinding. So every single blade is a different shape.
So that machine, by the way it fixtures and moves, can grind the top to bottom taper and the distal taper in the blade?
Well, it's what it's doing. What I'm trying to explain is that we're not grinding uniform shapes, but we have to grind a uniform edge on that ununiform shape. So to do that, we actually use those tables to twist and turn and push the blade in and out at certain points to give us this uniform edge on that ununiform shape. And it becomes a little bit even more complicated when we're grinding, for example, the whittler pattern like we're doing right now. So you're actually grinding these blades at really steep tapers. Like these two secondary blades on a whittler, like the Grinling whittler that we're doing right now, are ground. You can see them moving away from each other. They're ground at a very specific taper away from each other to create room inside the knife. Okay.
Which is how many parts do you guys scrap making whittlers?
More than you. Yeah. We just got done, for the most part, grinding the blades for the Grinling whittler, the 38 whittler. And it's a lot of work.
It's a labor of love, isn't it?
Yeah. So even with these really old 60, 70-year-old machines, though, with someone who knows what they're doing, we can still grind these blades consistently to 1 or 2 thousandths every single blade, which is important when you're making a knife like this. So after we've done all that setup work, and again, all these operations I've talked to you about so far, there's a lot of time invested in setting the machine up, okay? Then our person can come in and start actually running parts. Jameson oftentimes, he's sitting over there, will run our grinders for us. And he will take a part and he loads it into our fixture on our first grinder, okay?
So is that the near one or the one around the corner?
Right here, this one right in front of us. And then that hydraulic pulls the table in, the grinder then plunges into the blade. That's what creates your shoulder on your blade. And then the table starts pulling backwards, and it's pulling or dragging that blade across the surface of the wheel. And as it's pulled backwards across that, it's twisting and pushing out, doing all that pre-programming, really rudimentary pre-programming basically, as it pulls the blade back. And when it comes out of the first one, you have a blade that has one side of it ground. And then what he does is he comes over to his second side grinder, and it's the exact same thing, only the opposite. And it's also set up to do a particular grind, and the blade is loaded in, and it runs it in, and it grinds the second side. And what we have when it comes out is a blade that looks similar to what you see in your knife. It still has a point protector on it though. And the edge is just very slightly thicker than what you would see on your final knife. Okay? It's still very thin. If you ran your finger across it, you could certainly cut yourself on it. It's not sharp necessarily. And then the parts would come over here. They would actually come over to what Jameson is doing right now. So he is what we call tipping blades. So he is removing, or he just was, removing the point protector from the blade. So the point protector that was here on the end of my blade is what he's shaping off. So we don't need that anymore. But it was the main purpose for it being on there was when we were grinding them and or polishing the blades, which we might do on some orders. That point protector is protecting the point from being run over, so you have that crisp edge. And then when he's done there, the blades would then come back to our double header. And now we're going to do a slightly different operation. What we're doing is we are placing, we call it pulling the blade. We're placing the blade in between the wheels, and we bring those wheels in and pull the blade through the wheels. And what that does is it helps to remove some of the grind lines from the grinder, and it's also pinching on the edge of that blade, and it's giving us a slightly thinner edge. And when they're done there, we have a blade that could be sharpened. It's thin enough then to be honed. Okay. And then,
So is that also the final finish for the blade too, or is it?
no.
No, okay.
No, it's not. It would come down later on after it's assembled to have another satin finish placed on it. Or if it was a polished blade, it would be run through a polisher, which does some heavy polishing. It's a machine down there on the right. Before it's got some light polishing done up.
Gotcha.
Now, one other thing we would do here with the blades is the swedging. So when the blades are done being pulled, they would come back over here to our grinders, and we would do our machine swedging here. So there's two types of swedging on a traditional knife. There's a hand swedge or a drawn-on swedge, and there's a grind swedge or a machine swedge, what we often call it here. A hand swedge is what you see on a lot of Titty-Ute brand knives, except for our TC Barlows. Those have a grind swedge, but a hand swedge is the bevel that you see drawn along the top edge of the blade. And that's just as it sounds, it's done by hand on a belt sander. It's a very intricate job, and you're trying to remove that crisp edge on the back of the blade, and you're also giving a certain look. It's an aesthetics thing for the most part. Sometimes a hand swedge can also help the blades fit together inside the knife, which more often we do machine swedging for that kind of thing. And this whittler is a perfect example of that. So here we would do the machine swedge, which you can see on my knife here. You can see that cut in here.
Yep.
So this is done down here on these grinders. The difference being on a hand swedge, you wouldn't have this cut in, right?
This is going to be like a smooth plunge,
Yeah.
and there's not as much material being removed. Or not generally?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
This is also, like in the case again of the TC Barlow, the swedge is really only there for aesthetics. It gives a certain look, and it's an old style for a traditional knife, and it's also somewhat difficult to do, which is why we like to do it. But on this particular knife, or a lot of our, like a pen knife or a muskrat, you might see it, the swedge is actually creating room inside our knife for the blades. So this particular main blade, you can see when we started out with just a blade blank, it was 125 thousandths thick. And then when we actually ground the edge onto it, we cut into the shoulder. You can see the cut in there. And what we ended up with was a blade that was now maybe 85 thousandths thick. But then when we brought them over and put our machine swedge into it, we end up with a blade that is much, much thinner. And you can see that there. So it starts out 125, and we're down to here. Maybe 60 thousandths down here after
At the
the
widest
swedge.
point.
Yes. And what that does for us, you can see again where my coping blade passes by, it just happens to line right up with that swedge. So if that swedge wasn't there, when I tried to close my blade, it would hit or rub against that main blade. Okay? And you can see it's the same on the other side, where this clip passes by. Right there.
Perfect.
So when these swedges, in the case of this knife, are put in here, it's you oftentimes will see them. You see the mic sitting down there. They're checking the thickness, and it can be. It's tricky in that you have to grind it to a certain thickness. You have to worry though, especially when you have a nail nick in here. If you grind too much, if you didn't plan ahead when you put that nail nick in it, and
Your nail nick could punch through.
and your nail nick can come through the other side, especially when you're doing the swedging. There's a lot of forethought that goes into it. And you can see actually on my secondary blades, these are also swedged on the inside of both of those. That again is to create room inside the knife there.
And there's not much.
No, there's not. Not on this particular knife. We don't take a pre-made handle, slap it on there, and trim up the sides. So in the case of our wood handles, our acrylic handles, our bone handles, we're doing as much of the work as we possibly can do here. And in the case of the bone, in particular, we are doing all the jigging and dyeing that you see on it. Okay, so the bone starts out, and I'll show you a piece up here, what it looks like when it comes to us. We're doing all the work to cut the slabs off of the bone, to shape it as we say. You notice on our knives, our handles have a nice contour. They're not a blocky feeling. That's because of some of the extra work that we do down here. And then all the jigging, so you can see the many different jigging patterns that we do on our bone. That's all done right here. A lot of the stuff I can't show you because one, you don't want to breathe in a lot of bone dust, so we don't want people walking back in there when we're sawing and sanding it and working with it. But the way we do our jigging, we don't like people to, it's kind of a trade secret.
Understood.
So, but what I will say about it is that our handles are jigged basically by hand, one handle at a time. Okay, so every single handle is unique in that sense, and that the operator has the freedom to manipulate the handle in any way they need to. And that's how we get all these different patterns that you see. And then we also do all the dyeing here. Okay, so all the different colors you see in our bone are done here, and you can see yellows and blues and reds, tans, greens. The yellow is a pretty popular color.
Beautiful stuff.
Around, they go into our fabrication room, which is the room down below us. Down in there, they're doing quite a bit of work, like cleaning up the hollow inside the knife here. They're doing that hand swedging that I talked about. They're doing the rounds of the tang, or the square end of the tang. They're dressing that down there. They're also coloring the back. The coloring operation is something you'll see up here when we're doing the actual back of the knife, but they're removing more of that black, basically, from the heat treat on the back of the knife. And then they're sending the blades up to our assembly area where we're going to go in right now. A lot of our parts come up. So we have a little pulley here that will bring up parts from the fabrication room down below. We don't have a lot of parts here right now because they're assembling them as soon as they get them. You can see there's quite a bit of oil everywhere, and that's because carbon steel, got to keep it constantly oiled.
Rust is the enemy.
Yep. So we have blades and springs coming up here from our bone room in the back. You always hear that racket coming our handles. Our scales have also come up from downstairs. So this sample knife we have here is our Ben Hogan knife. So this is a scale for that. You can see the back of it. There's that Tommy pin where we attach the bolster. It's already been drilled out for our pins. This is a handle that's come in from our bone room, and it's been dyed and jigged. It's actually already had some holes drilled in it, which wouldn't necessarily be done yet. This is bone. If you look real close, you can see some of the coloration in the back of it.
Yeah.
It's going to be a red, I believe. I'm colorblind, so I'm always kind of guessing there. It's cut to length in there so that when the handle is placed, it should fit nice and tight between the bolsters. And we'll actually walk over here and watch Luann. Luann is
Hi, Luann.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Good to meet you. I'm Rob.
Okay.
Luann is drilling out the holes in the handle for us so we can attach the handle to the scale. This is your ebony wood. You can see if you look down below, you can see that she's operating this with a little board underneath that she lifts with her knees, and then she
yeah.
the table rises, and that's so she can hold the handle and the scale with two hands. Allows her to be more accurate.
Well, that's pretty cool. That's my knife.
Is it?
Well, one of them is.
Oh, okay. Well, we have many.
And then she
Is there
would-
one that says Rob on the inside of the liner?
Oh, I didn't look.
No?
I'm sorry. I'll keep my eye open now.
Okay, thanks.
She would come along over here. This is our riveter, and she would take her handle, and you see she's got some tweezers here. She would take a little rivet, load it inside there. You want to do one?
Oh, no, I was just
Oh,
going
okay.
to show you. No, I'm not sure if I'm quite set up.
Gotcha. She'd load that rivet in there, and then this would go on to the machine. It comes together and rivets
Wow.
it. So you can see this is one that she has ready to be riveted, and this is one here that's been riveted.
You know, the remarkable thing about that is how tiny that tooling is.
It's pretty small, isn't it?
It's
That's why
very
we're using tweezers here.
Those dies break easily, the riveting dies?
Not that I
No. Just having been around manufacturing, that's tiny stuff.
Yeah.
Very precise.
And then she would come over here, and this is where we're starting to work on our shield, or inlaying our shield. Okay, so you can see on my knife here, we have our unexcelled shield. Basically what they would do is they would take their shield. This is not the shield for this knife. My sample shield got lost. We get loaded in there. Luann would be working here. She would bring it over here to her steady. She'd take some nippers. She would trim off the excess of that pin, so we don't need all of that material.
Right. Leaving just a little nub, probably, just enough to.
And then she would take her hammer. You see, this is her hammer. It's got one side with a grit on it, and she would just peen that over. So she's hitting this by hand, and that's how we rivet the shield onto the handle. And then she would begin to assemble the knife. So she would take her two sides of her knife. In this case, you see these two. This is a mark side and a pile side. So the mark side of your knife is the side with the shield. It's the side I open my main blade from.
Right.
And the opposite side is my pile side.
Of course, that gets all confused when you're left-handed like me.
Sure. So then she would take her two sides.
Now you're making sure when you put it in there, you got a
Spring.
nut, right?
Take her two sides of spring, and she would start assembling them here. She doesn't have anything here for me to show you. Let me grab one over
Okay.
here real quick. What she's doing. So she has her mark side, her pile side. In this case, we have two double end springs, and then we also have a tapered spacer for this particular style of knife. So she's
Now you're
putting all these together here.
close to you, not away from
She's setting her pins in here, and
you. Well,
she's going to hand rivet this center pin. So she puts her brass pin into here. She brings it over to her steady, and she uses her hammer to hand rivet that
Wow.
that center pin. That's what you end up with, something like this. You can see there's a little bit of glue on the surface there. That's because on top of pinning our shields, they also put some glue in there as well.
Is that just to fill voids primarily, or?
Well, it's best of both worlds, basically.
Now, where's the one
And then, once they have the assembled piece, it goes over to here.
There's a couple of them.
And here is where they start inserting the blades into the knife. So you can see the springs inside the knife, how they stick up inside there.
Right.
The springs are actually curved inside the knife. And what we have to do is we have to bend them out of the way to get the blades in there.
Yeah.
Do you have one you want to put together?
I can. Actually, yes, I can.
So this, folks, this gentleman here is the janitor at GEC, right? Otherwise known as Bill Howard. He
Do I
owns,
need to
he owns
explain
the
this as I'm
company.
doing it?
Yeah.
All right, the first thing I'm going to do, since we put blades in both ends of the knife, we have to put the two secondary blades in. This is a whittler, so we're putting two blades in. And this is called first blading. So I'm going to make sure that my springs are pushed back out of the way. And then we'll see if we can locate these properly and put a pin in there. There we go. Now that's first bladed. Now we'll put a blade in the other side.
So do they always go in there that easily?
No, never.
No.
We have a little tool. This is a tool that's typical for the cutlery industry. It's called a witch. We're going to put that in there like that. Push that pin back. And we're going to apply pressure to the back of the witch, which will then force the springs out the back side of the knife, like that.
So now the blade can freely go where it needs to go?
Yes, we're going to pull that pin like that. Slide the tang of the blade in. Put that in there.
So now all that's left is the riveting of those pins or the peening of the pins?
Well, we have to, before the knife leaves this room, we have to grind the kicks, and we can come over here and do that right now. This point is called the kick of the blade, and it dictates, the amount of material on there dictates where the point of the blade sets in relation to in or out of the knife. So we're going to take a little bit off that. And now you can see we're flush with the edge of the liner. Now we're going to do the other two blades. Now what we're going to do with these is put them in a little bit further. That's the pen blade, and that's where we're setting that at. And now we're going to take the sheep wood blade and grind a little bit off it and match it to the pen blade. And now we're ready to leave assembly.
Wow. So you did all that right your first try.
It was all an accident, believe me.
So you're not really that good?
No.
No? We did this in one take, guys. Well, you guys have to admit that was pretty cool. You know, for the first part of our video here, and you can see him in the, I think in part 2, sort of flying around the hallway, running past us a couple times. The guy in the hat, that's Bill Howard, and he sort of showed up in assembly. And first he was a little curious about what this guy with the camera was doing in his factory, and admonished me and William to make sure we weren't tipping off any competition about how to make a knife as well as GEC does. And you know, so once we got that out of the way, Bill decided to join us in the assembly department, put together a knife. And guys, if you watched my videos, previous videos in the Traditional Knives Anthology that we do with Steve from How About the Truth, you understand how complicated to put together a Whittler is. And the knife that we're following through the process from here on out is the number 38 Grinling Whittler, a very long, very precise Whittler pattern. And Bill just threw those blades in there like nothing, got them lined up the first time. He ground the kicks, and they were perfect the first time. Yeah, he would like to tell us that's luck, but word on the street is nobody builds a Whittler like Bill Howard. And he can do that with a well-trained staff, or he can do that with his own hands. This is not a company owner who sits behind his desk all day. I watched Bill pretty closely this morning with one eye as I had another eye on the camera. He flies around this plant like a tornado. If anybody's having trouble at their station with their machine, their process, he's there fixing it for them, showing them how to get the most out of the equipment, how to build a knife the right way. And he's got a great sense of humor once he can throttle back the intensity a little bit. Just a really, really neat man. So we're glad to be able to spend some time with him today. Hey, we got one more part to go, so stay tuned for part 4 of the GEC segment of the TKP. Gosh, I'm starting to sound like nothing fancy with these acronyms. Sorry about that, guys. No, I'm not. Anyway, number 4 in the GEC portion is going to be the hafting process through finishing and sharpening. That sounds kind of interesting, doesn't it? You should watch that just to find out what hafting means, I think. But it'll be better than that. Well, that's it for tonight, my friends. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is sharp.